Good morning. Can you all hear me? Yes? Can you hear me? Good morning and welcome to session panel 2 on igniting discourse, galvanizing key stakeholders for UN Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Zeina Nazer. I am co-founder of Cities Forum, external expert for UK Department for Transport, and chair for ITS UK Road User Charging Forum. So this session will be talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, presenting intricate challenges that demand global collaboration and concerted effort. We will convene thought leaders to deliberate on the indispensable role of businesses in achieving these ambitious objectives. With a focus on actionable insights, our panelists here will set out the necessary steps for businesses to attain the SDG and to establish a comprehensive framework for fulfilling broader sustainability, decarbonisation, and net zero goals. We have a lineup of amazing speakers and experts in this field. We have Dr. Nina Seega, Research Director for Sustainable Finance from Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. We have Rajeev Peshawaria, CEO of Stewardship Asia Center, Arushi Gupta. So Arushi is Engagement Manager for Ipsos Strategy 3, and Kaylee Lee Simeon, Technical Manager for Plastic Strategic Evolution Disclosure Content for CDP. We'll start first with our speaker, Dr. Nina Seega. Dr. Nina from Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership. Dr. Nina is named by the global news agency Reuters as one of the 20 trailblazing women in climate in 2024. She is the director for the Center for Sustainable Finance at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership. And I would like to first start by asking you if you want to add more to your bio and then ask you my question.
Well, so a little bit maybe for around the Center for Sustainable Finance. So we sit within Cambridge University and we do research as well as convening, and we've got 3 leadership platforms within the centre. Investment Leaders Group, where we work with investment managers and asset owners, Banking Environment Initiative, well, what it says on the tin, and ClimateWise, which is our insurance platform. And with them we work on climate, nature and social issues and look how to mainstream sustainability into every single financial decision, but also how to change the financial system, change the financial architecture to better serve the SDGs.
Okay, thank you. So, Nina, at the moment we are seeing businesses going quiet because of geopolitics, and leaders should be more vocal and should call the support for supportive, ambitious, and consistent policy. These are basically your words. So I would like to elaborate on that.
So, I mean, it's really interesting. The name of this panel is pretty massive, igniting discourse and saving the world. But we have, over the last year, seen quite a bit of quietening down across the business and the policy and in the financial world on leaders perhaps continuing to do work on sustainable finance but not being so loud and so out in the market with it. Businesses perhaps doing a little bit of the same as they're waiting for one of the biggest elections years in the history to come out. But I think it's really interesting because there are different ways in which both business and finance can engage out and be really loud. One is by talking about what they're doing, but 2 is also by talking about what they need to move the dial. And some of the stuff that they need is a much more supportive and ambitious policy landscape. And when else to set that policy landscape than in an election year, effectively, because we are, the leaders that we're electing today will be the ones who will be solving a lot of the challenges that we're facing over the next 5 years, over the absolutely key decade. So being out there and talking about what policies are needed to support, talking about the work that is already being done, and talking about the risks that we are facing and the risks that are fundamentally mostly unpriced within our financial systems is really, really key.
Thank you so much, Nina. So our next speaker is Rajeev Peshawaria. Rajeev is CEO for Stewardship Asia Center. He's also founder and president of Leadership Energy Consulting, and he's the author of Wall Street Journal and Amazon bestseller, Open Source Leadership, Too Many Bosses, Too Few Leaders, Be the Change, and the latest and greatest, Sustainable Sustainability, which I received as a gift. You will be telling us a little bit about yourself and about your book, maybe?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. So yeah, Stewardship Asia Center, where I work, we look at both environmental and social sustainability, and here's what we are basically saying.
You need to get your microphone closer.
Here's what can you hear me all right? Yeah. Here's what we are looking at. Despite so much money, regulation and incentives thrown at the issue of environmental and social sustainability, why is progress so slow? Why are we moving towards 2.8 degrees rather than 1.5 degrees? Why is inequality increasing rather than decreasing? Get this, 22 rich men have more wealth than all the women of Africa put together. 1% of the richest people have more wealth than compared to twice as much wealth as 99% of us. So climate, we're not making progress. Inequality is increasing, and cybercrime has now become the biggest and most profitable crime, leaving behind drug trade by a mile. So despite so much of a high decibel on sustainability, why are we not making progress? So that's one thing we look at. The other thing we look at is those organizations that are making a meaningful impact on environmental and social challenges, how are they doing it and what do we learn from them? So that's what we do at the center.
Okay, thank you, Rajeev. I like your passion, so we need more passionate people like you. So we move next to Arushi Gupta, Engagement Manager for Ipsos Strategy 3. So Arushi is sustainability expert with ESG consulting team in Ipsos, based in London. She leads ESG projects for global organizations such as Unilever, Aviva, and Tetra Pak, amongst many, many others. So, Arushi, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself more, and then I'll move to my question to you.
Yeah, of course. So can you hear me okay? Okay. Hi, everybody. Good morning. So I work with Ipsos. You predominantly know Ipsos from consumer research, lots of quantitative, qualitative research, and more recently from the polling side because of the upcoming election. Within Ipsos, we have a consulting arm called Strategy 3, and we do lots and lots of work in the ESG space. So I'm a part of the ESG consulting team there, and we look at all sorts of challenges that clients might face when it comes to being on their ESG journey. So from the reporting side of things, for example, with the new regulations that have come up, ESRS, CSRD, etc. So if it's about running a double materiality assessment or ESG reporting, all the way to something as basic as where should a business start when it comes to ESG? What should be the first step that they should take when it comes to getting on to their ESG journey and looking at these SDG goals that we have out there. So we look at a broad spectrum of work across the business. And like Zeina mentioned, we work with clients both in the private and public sector. And yeah, pleasure to be here.
Okay, thank you, Arushi. So my question to you is, you focus on the challenges businesses face when they try to align their business's goal with SDG. Can you give some practical advice, including frameworks?
Yeah, of course. I think the first and foremost, when businesses start on their journey towards a more sustainable business, is they often get to shouting about their ESG efforts without actually putting their strategy in place, internal strategy in place, or often it might be a boardroom level conversation that we're seeing within the business, but not really engaging their employees with it. So I think driving with purpose is a key message there, that from a more practical point of view, you're looking to understand and do this in a very credible way. So at Ipsos, we have a proprietary framework called a shield, standard, and sword framework. So think of a British armor knight, and their shield is essentially things that you are expected of what we call the hygiene factors. So things that you're expected to have in place before you start shouting about your ESG credentials. So for example, in the fashion space, it might be child labor. That's a big no. So that's something that you can claim, but that is a shield that is expected of you. Your competitors are doing this. Think of a sword, which is what your USP, your point of differentiation would be. So if I'm thinking again in the fashion space, it might be sustainable cotton, it might be a landfill program that you might have, but really thinking granularly from your supply chain, from your initiatives that you're going on. Gone are those days when we're talking about CSR, right? We're really talking about ESG embedded in the ways of working as a business. And then your standards are things that ladder up to what your brand represents. So how do you do this in a really credible way? You cannot have fun with it if that's not what your brand ethos is. If your brand has been always about a really serious messaging, playing into sustainability with that same credibility is really important. How do you come across really genuine, really authentic? Doing that is going to be really critical. So that's a framework that we typically recommend to our clients who are onboarding on this journey.
Okay, thank you so much, Arushi. So we move next to our fourth panelist, Kaylee Lee Simeon, Technical Manager for Plastic Strategic Evolution Disclosure Content, CDP. So Kaylee leads the development of CDP's plastics disclosure framework to accelerate corporate action on plastic pollution and waste. In 2023, just under 3,000 corporates with a combined market cap of $25 trillion. Wow. Disclosed to CDP for the first time, representing the largest voluntarily disclosed sample of plastics data worldwide. So, Kaylee, my question to you is, why is viewing these SDGs holistically key to achieving them?
Thank you. And hi, everyone. Lovely to be here today. So, the SDGs, as I'm sure most of you know, they cover social, economic, and environmental goals. And they're all interconnected. And it's really key to look at them holistically to achieve progress on them. Because of the interconnectedness, there's some of you may know this already, but the phrase "the just transition," it's about increasing all the sustainable development goals. You can increase environmental goals, for example, take action on climate change and reduce your carbon emissions. But if in general, for example, electric vehicles or public transport is not it is prohibitively expensive, then you're not increasing the social goals. So it's all about lifting everyone up as you progress it. I like to give an example during COVID-19. Of course, the economy was shot, people were out of work, so SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, was falling. So to do this, a lot of governments started investing heavily in fossil fuels to try boost the economy. So by trying to progress one, they were reducing action on another. So this is why it's really key to view them holistically. I'll give a tangible example. Say you are trying to procure packaging with increased recycled content. That's great. That is increasing goals on responsible production and consumption, all the issues to do with overproduction of plastics. That will reduce climate action, increase climate action. It would reduce plastic pollution. But there's more you can do here as well. In your procurement policy, perhaps you can also look at if the suppliers is also paying their laborers a fair wage. And then you're also increasing social goals as well. And then my last point here is that to view SDGs holistically, it's really, really important that there is board oversight, that there is governance from the top, and there's accountability and responsibility in the sustainability strategy. And that is the way that if there's accountability at the top, it can trickle down and really have a cohesive, holistic sustainability strategy to achieve all the goals.
Thank you so much, Kaylee. So to engage the audience more, I'm going to give the floor now to the audience to ask questions and specify to which speaker. And then I'll move back to my next following question. So here's...
Any questions?
If there are none, can I ask one? I have a question for Rajeev because his tagline is really interesting. Sustainable sustainability. And so your book talks about why ESG is not enough. What is enough? So give us, so we don't have to read the book, given how many books, we'll buy it, Rajeev, but give us the thesis in 3 things, like what is it about?
Fair enough. Thank you so much for that question, Nina. I'll give you the short answer first and then a slightly longer one. The short answer is that we are trying to solve a leadership issue with money, incentives, and regulation. And that's the problem. That's why it's not working. We looked at 100 organizations that actually are having a meaningful impact, that are finding profitable solutions to either environmental or social issues through their business. And we asked them, how do you do it? And it turned out they were not doing it because of cheap capital. There's $43 trillion in ESG assets right now. And I ask anyone here, how much of that is actually going towards environmental and social impact? Very little, right? They're not doing it because of cheap capital. They're not doing it because of regulatory pressure. They're not doing it because of incentives like linking CEO comp to ESG markers or anything like that. They're doing it because they want to. They're doing it because they see themselves as stewards of planet Earth and humanity. And they know that if they focus on society and environment first, their business is going to live longer. One example, Faber-Castell, the pencil makers in Germany, 270 years of profitable growth. And you ask them, how are you so successful for so long? And their answer, because we think society first, because we think environment first. So they see themselves as steward leaders. They believe in a certain set of values and they pursue a purpose to create a collective better future. That's the idea.
Can I probe? Sorry, this is because you've just told me my job doesn't need to exist because they're not doing it because of cheap capital. And if they're not doing it because of cheap capital, what the hell am I doing running a Center for Sustainable Finance? So the bit that I think I agree with you. Leaders do go out there and do better because they're integrated into society. But how do we push those who don't want to? Because I think there is a larger point there.
So steward leaders believe in interdependence, which basically is the belief that the more I give, the more I get. Okay? The Tata Group out of India. Before the first steel plant was built in a rural village in India, the founder, Jamshedji Tata, built hospitals, built schools, built community parks, built churches and temples, not because he was a philanthropist who was giving away his money, but because he believed that only if I build a whole township around the steel plant will engineers come and work here and move their families here. Okay, so it's a business imperative. They don't do it because of cheaper capital. They don't do it because of regulatory pressure. In fact, what Faber-Castell did is they started providing employee benefits like housing, insurance, etc. to employees a full 40 to 50 years before such things became the law in Germany. What they did paved the way to what became the law in Germany. So that's what these guys do. It's a very different kind of leadership mindset. We call it steward leadership.
On the same line, Arushi, so what steps can businesses take to tackle this challenge in terms of, so we see businesses often being accused of greenwashing and misleading consumers. In your views, Arushi, what steps can businesses take to tackle this challenge as they work towards their net zero and sustainability goals?
I'd like to give another example. Thank you, Rajeev. Those are really insightful examples. Another one from a brand that we all know and heard of is Patagonia, right? The way they owned up when they made a mistake through a small video was fantastic. That was done in a very credible, very genuine way to say, actually, hey, we messed up and we're owning up to our mistake. And so we're now going to start looking at all aspects of ESG and we're going to make some changes in our business, right? And for all the panelists who've explained this already, it's not a mere checkbox exercise anymore. It needs to be baked into the way your business is functioning. It's often we call it purpose with profits, right? So it's a dichotomy of what's good for the business, for the financial health of your business, as well as what's good for the planet, the people, our society, and how do you marry those two is really interesting. And often we use a tool called double materiality in the most recent times. It is, I think, stemming from the ESG reporting and a lot of regulatory pressure, a lot of pressure from the competitors as well. But if we actually look at that tool, that assessment, it is quite strategic in nature. It does boil down the key ESG risks, the key ESG opportunities, issues that are out there that a business needs to focus on. So it's when you're conducting, as a business leader, when you're conducting your ESG materiality assessments, do not just do it because of compliance reasons, regulatory pressure. Do it because you actually want to understand the impact that the ESG opportunities have on your business. What are the changes that you need to make as a business? I think that's going to be really key going forward. So it's moving beyond that that kind of checkbox exercise to actually understanding what are those priorities that I need to focus on, not just in the short term, but also in the long term.
Thank you, Arushi. And Kaylee, if you want to add anything to what Arushi said?
I think that, so thank you, Arushi and Rajeev as well, it's really interesting. So I've worked on a lot of global large-scale circular economy policy projects globally. I worked on the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive for the EU. I worked on Singapore's deposit return scheme, which was the first of the kind in Southeast Asia, and informed the sustainable strategy for sustainable and circular textiles in the EU as well. I find it really interesting, your points. I guess from businesses want to be able to create change in ESG, but sometimes they need a little push. And from my experience, I guess this is where regulatory pressures do come in. A lot of businesses now in the EU, they're having to increase their recycled content in their packaging. They're having to reuse or design packaging for reuse and durability because of these regulations. I guess without the regulation, or maybe without capital investment as well, I think to be able for large-scale change, which is what needed for systemic change, we got to start somewhere, right? So do you see quite a difference, Arushi, between companies that really do have built their business models on sustainability, and then companies who, because of regulatory pressures or investment pressures, they have become more sustainable and are actually really good at it as well?
I think that's really interesting because there is this dichotomy of, right, like do you keep pushing ahead because it's now you need to kind of progress because of the regulatory pressures and so forth. But there are these other cases as well. We were talking backstage about another example of a brewery who went in and did lots of work in the environmental space, came up with a wind-powered beer and so forth, but actually the social impact was really lacking behind. There was a lot of toxic workplace culture. So we're seeing those businesses that they're just doing it because they're under pressure, and it's just acting on that pressure. I think down the line, where consumers are smart today, they are going to call those businesses out. But I agree with your point that you do need, as a business, you do need that extra push, and the regulatory pressure is that extra push right now, specifically in the EU. I think it's kind of a wait and watch on how businesses are doing this. I think my learning working with all of these businesses is doing this in a credible way is going to lend yourself in the future.
Can I make a counterpoint of view, if I may, with due respect?
Yeah.
So everybody says that regulation is going to save the world, okay? And everybody says measure, 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 and report is going to save the world. And sorry, but those two things are the ones that are creating the worst possible behavior. Regulation is needed for civil society to behave, but regulation minimizes harm. At best, it minimizes harm, although it doesn't stop the real geniuses to even go around and find loopholes for regulation. So at best, it minimizes harm. What we need to solve for environmental and social sustainability these days is massive amounts of innovation, and there can be no law which says thou shalt innovate more. Point number one on regulation. Second, measure, 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 report. All the greenwashing is happening because, you see, sustainability reports are getting thicker and glossier every year. And because of that measurement pressure, people are sort of measuring more and doing less. Whereas the companies that we speak to, which are all chronicled in this book, who are really doing well by doing good, by making money, by addressing the very challenges that exist today, they are saying we do more and measure less. So these are two very counterintuitive points of view that I'd like everybody to consider. That just because something is a management mantra, what gets measured gets done, doesn't necessarily mean it's true.
Nina.
So I think we struggle with this a lot on sustainability. I don't think there is a silver bullet. Like, regulation's not going to solve it. Money's not going to solve it. Fabulous leadership will get some of the way there, but on its own, it's not going to solve it. So we did a piece in November before the Dubai COP around private finance into emerging markets and developing economies, and how do you get private finance to finance more on the nature and climate nexus. And we very cheekily called it everything, everywhere, all at once. And the idea is that you need everything. You need cheap capital. You need better regulation. You need a lot of really great leaders who will be showing the way and who will be way ahead of the pack. But you also need something to bring up the rear. And that bringing up the rear will fundamentally be the regulatory point. And I think sometimes we kind of, we get over-obsessed about disclosures too much or regulation is too much. But you take away the disclosure and the regulation, and you're telling me every single company is going to look at that budget that they use for disclosure and regulation and go, yes, now that is the money I'm going to invest in my next sustainability initiative. No, they won't, right? So what you have is, you have then parts of the puzzle, which is being driven by different parts of the conversation. And I was in Zurich last week at a sustainable finance forum, and we had corporates in the room and we had financiers in the room. And one of the corporates came up and said, well, actually, CSRD has been really helpful in pushing the work. So I don't think, yes, too much disclosure is bad, and yes, greenwashing is rubbish. But there are ways to address that, and I don't think as a sustainability ecosystem we should be spending a lot of time fighting about which way is the best way, and we should rather be spending a lot of time supporting each other and going, okay, Rajeev is going to figure out the leadership puzzle. I'm going to try to figure out some of the money puzzle, but you lot in the room are going to help me figure out some of the money puzzle. And Arushi and Kaylee are going to sort out the consulting and the disclosure puzzle. So it is a conversation of many actors and many parts.
Kaylee.
Thank you. I guess I just want to go back to the measure point. The reporting burden is high for a lot of corporates right now. There is a lot of different standards and frameworks out there. Of course, CSRD is going to be mandatory for a lot of corporates. There's TNFD, there's GRI, there's loads. We call it alphabet soup. And CDP, we're very aware of that. That's why we have worked this year to create an integrated framework where we call it a one-stop shop. Disclose to CDP, and you'll also be gathering the data you need for CSRD, for TNFD, for GRI, of course plastics, the big ones, Ellen MacArthur Foundation Global Commitment, who we partner with. So I guess that's one. But I think it's really how you view disclosure, I think. A lot of corporates do view it as a compliance issue. We're going to need to disclose because else we're liable for fines. Which is true, but if you switch your mindset and think of it as, I am gathering all this data, and it's data that's going to be the thing that can show me where to take action and where to direct my focus to increase progress. Data is valuable. Data is really valuable for your sustainability strategy. But if you just view it as a compliance issue, you're putting all these resources into your CSRD report, and then you're not doing anything with it. And that's annoying, and that is time. It's a burden. It's a resource burden. It's time. It's money. But if you view it as, this is the data I need to be able to reduce my environmental impacts, to be able to increase my governance structure so my sustainability strategy flows throughout the whole organization. That is what I'm really keen about, and I'm really keen for companies to understand that it may be time-consuming to get this data that you need to be compliant, but it's also incredibly, incredibly valuable, and you need data to know where to start.
Thank you, Kaylee. We have a lovely lady here with a question.
Hi, morning. I just wondered about private equity. I'm really quite interested. I know you just mentioned private finance, but to what extent do you think they are doing enough? Probably, I don't know. Are they not? And the SDGs, I guess, we haven't really mentioned them very much. Do you think that they are going to come, hopefully, more into play? And I guess probably private equity, how are they going to interact with those? Thank you.
I'll take that one, I'm assuming, as the financier in the room. So it's quite interesting. I was literally in a 2-hour workshop at the City of London yesterday on private equity and on just transition. On what we're seeing in that space is certain private equity and private debt companies are going into really interesting emerging markets and are doing some really interesting stuff there. Where they need help with scaling. And they also, so there are two problems. One is scaling those who are already sitting in those geographies and trying to do some stuff. And there were some really interesting examples in the conversation yesterday about how if you incorporate social into the projects from the beginning, so essentially if you set out proper housing for people as you're building out the projects end up to be on time and on budget, and it's not a cost, it's actually an investment into the community and how it works. But the second problem is we absolutely don't have enough money, and so in addition to helping all of these private equity and private debt companies to scale their effort, we also need lots of new entrants. Because if you look at cross-border financial flows, they're really, really rubbish. And they're getting worse, fundamentally. So it's how do we show that the risks of certain emerging markets, there are some real risks, but there are also some perceived risks. So we're doing a lot of work, for example, on thinking through how to bring that risk perception down, thinking through what kind of financial structures exist to actually encourage investors that have never been in these markets to go and to invest their money, because fundamentally we're not going to be able to do it with public finance alone. We need all the private finance, and private finance right now is not flowing where it needs to go.
Just another word on that private equity thing. I mean, there's private equity and there's private equity, isn't it? I spent 20 years on Wall Street. And it depends on what kind of private equity you are. Are you somebody who believes in environmental and social sustainability and therefore progress on the SDGs? Then your money is going to go and work well in creating those solutions. But if you're a private equity house that just wants to churn quickly and sell the parts, if you will, then it's not.
Just 30 seconds. The other thing we're trying to do actually is to set up a private equity group at a kind of a Center for Sustainable Finance for the following reason. And private equity is fundamentally amazing at taking a corporate and driving up its financial returns. Can you imagine if you take that business model and create a cadre of sustainability private equity? So companies that would go into companies and fundamentally just do a sustainability transformation. So use a lot of the same levers, but with the end being a multiplied impact as opposed to just a multiplied financial return. I mean, I think that kind of stuff would be really, really fun.
Kaylee?
And do you also see private equity going into, I guess, the flashier parts of sustainability? So going back to kind of recycling, chemical recycling is really big at the moment because it's great for recycling very hard to recycle plastics, but there's less private equity going into expanding collection of waste because it's a little less flashy, right? Chemical recycling is a buzzword. So is that something that you see as well?
I think there's a different level of sexiness in projects, I think, and people react in different ways. I mean, you see VC, venture capital going in lots of these places, but I do think that there is a level of, I mean, even if you look at all the stages here, right, you get the really interesting carbon removal technology talk that is going to get lots of people listening into it, as opposed to really boring stuff of how do we decarbonize our main sector. So there is a little bit of how do we make some of these down-to-earth tech a little bit more interesting and fun.
Arushi, you want to add anything?
No, I think they've covered everything. No,
Okay.
It's super interesting. Though.
Okay, and Rajeev, so you probably have mentioned that, but just to refocus on this point, why ESG is not enough, despite so much attention on both environmental and social sustainability these days, and why is the progress so slow? So you mentioned that, but maybe if you want to add any more points.
Yeah, so, there's a lot. We looked at companies and their response to SDGs, their response to environmental and social action. And we created a spectrum. There's the good players and there's the bad actors, right? On the one hand, you have the greenwashers. The greenwashers are profiting from today's challenges. They have no incentive to do anything about changing the way their business models work. Because if you change them for the betterment of the earth and society, then they go out of business. So they are the greenwashers. Then you have the deniers. What climate change? What inequality? And even if those things exist, they're not my problem. Then you have the window dressers. everybody's talking about sustainability, I better do something. So dress up my window, it's all form, very little substance. Then you have the box checkers. Let me do whatever the regulator says and no more. Okay, because I don't want to get into trouble with the law. And then there's a small percentage of organizations that we call real steward leaders. They are finding profitable solutions to today's challenges. So on the one hand, you have people profiting from today's challenges. On the other end of the spectrum, people who are finding profitable solutions to today's challenges. And here's the thing. The reason why money as a motivator, capital, in regulation as a push, and incentives as an extrinsic motivator, they will only go so far. The guys who are on this side of the spectrum who are making the massive impact on environment and society, they believe in 4 specific things. As I mentioned, they believe in interdependence. Strongly believe the more I give, the more my business is going to succeed and for longer. You look at any business that's more than 100 years old today, and they've been focusing on sustainability from day one, from when they were a little SME. Second, they take a long-term view. Yeah, there may be some pain in the short term, but in the long term, we're going to be beating the market. They take ownership. They see themselves as stewards. We take ownership for today's biggest existential challenges, and we're going to put our business to work and make money by addressing those very challenges. Most important, number 4, they believe in creative resilience, which means to make money in this way, the way I'm talking about it, is much harder than making money the normal way. You need innovation, innovation, innovation. The thing with innovation is you fail 8 out of 10 times, but this is where the resilience comes in. We will keep looking for innovative ways to make money by addressing climate change, for example. World Economic Forum says there's $10.1 trillion of new business opportunities every year for the next 20 years on climate change alone. So can we please change the narrative from cost and compliance and reporting to opportunity? People say, I'm a fiduciary, I'm a board member, I'm a fiduciary for the shareholder. Well, if you're the fiduciary of the shareholder, then focus on the opportunity, not on just the cost and the risk. So that's the issue. We need to change the narrative.
And when you say we need more innovation, does it mean we need more funding, or can you do it without the funding?
Great question. So the biggest corporations in the world, we live in the world of trillion-dollar corporations, they have no shortage of money. They have no shortage of cash. And when people say to me, we can't do this because the consumer is not willing to pay the premium to go green. I say, why should the consumer pay a premium? Because I'm already reeling under inflation, I can barely pay the rent, and you're asking me to pay $10 more for a green whatever? It's up to you, big corporations, to find innovation and fund the innovation, and you have the money to do so. So find me solutions where I can buy green at no extra cost. I mean, a few years ago, to make a phone call from London to New York cost you $100 a minute. Yeah. Today, it's for free. That's the kind of innovation we need. We don't need consumers to pay $10 extra for a 2-hour flight to use sustainable aviation fuel. That's not the answer. Innovation has taken the world to where we are today. And we need organizations to put their pennies on innovation, and there's plenty of money going for that. So
you're saying that big corporations should be paying for that?
It's in their own interest.
I think Zeina is going for taxation here.
If you don't innovate, your business is going to die. So for your own interest, see, wealth has been created throughout history when an entrepreneur was able to put their finger on the biggest pain points of society and find a profitable solution. Whether it was railroads, whether it was steel, whether it was electricity, steel, any oil. Today's biggest pain points are climate change, socioeconomic inequality, and cyber vulnerability. Ultra amounts of wealth will be made by the innovators if they focus away from cost into innovation.
So in this, sorry, 1 second. So in this case, maybe we need to categorize what you mean by big corporation. So maybe we need to put some kind of, who are they? I mean, how many are they in the world?
So, out of the 100 biggest economies in the world today, guess how many are countries and how many are companies? Only 31 of the biggest economies, 100 economies in the world are countries. 69 are corporations. So they have plenty of money, number one. Number two, as Nina will tell you, there is no shortage of capital. So even if you're a small SME, my recommendation is start with innovation first and figure out how you're going to make money, because it's much easier to do it when you're small. That's the point. Where are we living? Asking the question, what's your net zero strategy, in my opinion, is the wrong question. The question I want to ask is, what's your money-making strategy for the next 10 years? What does the world need, and what are you going to give?
Nina?
No, I was just thinking, I think the slight trouble with waiting for innovation to solve all of our issues is that we have about 5, 7, 2024, 6 years, realistically, to move the dial properly. And innovation takes a little bit of time. And actually, if you think about, if you read Mariana Mazzucato about who funded a lot of the innovation that we run at, it's the government, fundamentally. I mean, if you look at the amount of money Tesla got from the government, it's not an insignificant amount of money, right? If you look at how we funded a lot of tech development, again, it's public money going into it. So yes, we do need more innovation. Yes, we should look for more profitable ways of doing stuff. But we should also think about the fact that we've got no time at all, and we're not pricing the stuff we're not pricing the needed speed of change into the way our organizations work, into the way our economies work. And I think what's really interesting as well is that when the balance tips, so if you think about the last transformation, when we went to horses to cars, that took 10 years. As fundamentally super fast, from going no charging infrastructure, no petrol stations anywhere in the world, right, to going a fundamentally different way of mobility. So thinking about how quickly this will come, and I actually think that a lot of the corporations that are running today will be disrupted and will not be in business in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And a lot of the disruptors will change the way we do things. But having said that, I do still think it's a much more complex solution than kind of...
Kaylee?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it's the corporations who should be responsible for it, and that's really extended producer responsibility, right? That is the policy framework where producers need to pay increased fees for putting on the market products that are hard to recycle, not durable, has reduced modularity, so difficult to separate and recycle out or reuse. So really, I think what we're doing here is we're piecing together all the different parts of society which needs to drive progress towards reaching the SDGs at 2030. And it's like a big puzzle, and it can be complicated, but I also agree with you, there's a lot of opportunity. Circular economy, that's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity which will create jobs, it would change business models, it will create new systems, and that's innovation. And it requires innovation to move from our linear economy to a circular one. And there's different ways, different actors, different pressures, whether it's policy, regulation, or stewardship.
Thank you, Arushi. Arushi, I was going to ask you. Go ahead.
Just to add, if I may, Rajeev, to your 4-point list, I think what we're saying here is there is a need for systemic thinking, because the solution there is at a very systemic level. So we need to look at it from a very holistic point of view. If you're thinking of an innovation, it needs to be very holistic. We cannot ignore the macro forces, inflation, cost of living crisis, all of these things that are impacting us. But also we live in a very globalized way. Right now, the world globalization's massive, and I know since COVID we probably thought more local the better, but actually in reality we are global citizens today. We are from different parts of the world. Even this panel today probably represents from like different parts of the world. So we need to think of the cultural impact that any solution would have. We need to think of what is our demographic really desiring, what is feasible as a solution, what is desirable, and what is viable as well. So I think those are the three things. So if I could add to your point of list, Rajeev, it would be a systemic approach to innovation as well on that list.
On that point, Arushi, so I'm going to ask you a question. Sustainability has been making waves in boardrooms and leadership meetings for the last few years, and we've seen some action in this space. How can business leaders identify what are the key strategic priorities are, and how they can align it with the SDG?
Right. So I think starting off with, because the conversation starts off in boardrooms and board level executive conversations, I think really choosing the right framework, really choosing what does it fundamentally mean for my business is really critical. So to Rajeev's point, we're not saying what is your ESG strategy, understand what is your business strategy here, how am I going to go about doing business. I think that's really fundamental. The second is, how do I go on about this journey? It cannot be a big fluffy ambition that I put out there in the public. It needs to be backed by evidence. It needs to be backed by effort that I'm going to put in. So really looking at ins and outs of your business is key, I think. And that means it's not just your investor buy-in, your key stakeholder buy-in, but also understand what is the voice of the external party to your business. So you're not operating in silo as a business. You are operating in a society on this planet, understanding what is the industry doing, what are your competitors doing, what are some of the NGOs, think tanks, where is movement happening, understanding what is the voice of your external stakeholders is what I'd call them, where is that, and then also what do your consumers want. At the end of the day, a business will not succeed if your consumers are not purchasing your products, your service, right? So what is the voice of your customer, your consumers is really critical. Obviously, don't go and ask them, hey, are you willing to pay more for a sustainable product? We know what the answer to that will be. So really thinking about the whole picture, like I said, in a holistic manner is going to be really, really key for
Thank you, Arushi, for a great input. And Kaylee, so how can businesses manage their plastic to progress the SDG?
Great, thank you. So yeah, touching on Arushi's point, kind of the holistic framing, so right now we exist in a linear economy, take, make, waste, and there's loads of impacts to do with plastics all across the value chain. Human health is a big one. Did you know about 16,000 chemicals are involved in the production of plastics, and about 4,000 of them are chemicals of concern. So they've been proven to be endocrine disruptors or carcinogenic. And then you also have, of course, pollution. About 20,000 tons of plastic flows into the sea in APAC every year. And climate change as well. About 85% of global of carbon emissions from plastics is to do with plastic production. In 2050, if single-use plastics continue at growth at the same rate, it can make up 5 to 10% of global carbon emissions. So this is scary, and it is a very interconnected issue. So this is why transitioning to a circular economy for plastics, but for other materials as well, can reach the SDGs, can progress the SDGs. Reusing plastics means that in your value chain, less chemicals are being pumped into the environment. So that's SDG 3, that's good health and well-being. But you're also looking at social issues too. There's a part of America called Kansas Alley. It's along the Mississippi River, where they have loads of plastic production plants. These areas tend to be very diverse and low income. So now you're seeing connections to inequalities too, to reduced inequalities. And then, of course, we have the environmental issues too. But this is just kind of an example of how transitioning to a circular economy, keeping materials in use for longer, increasing the durability, and really trying to eliminate waste and pollution. It doesn't just support the environmental SDGs, it also supports the social SDGs. And as Rajeev mentioned as well, it's an economic opportunity. Transitioning to these circular business models is an economic opportunity. There's lots of room for job creation, for money to be created from these new technologies and systems. So it's really about this holistic framing, and when you start to transition to a circular economy, you're progressing all the SDGs.
Thank you. So we have a very eager audience member who would like to ask another question. So if you
Hi, sorry, I don't mean to dominate it, but isn't the bottom line, doesn't really matter what we do in life, if we don't have any clean air, plastic-free water, there's no profit on a dead planet. That, I know it's an exhausted line, but it's absolutely true. So, I have a theory that every board meeting should start, their point one in their agenda is okay, we're all here together today, what are we doing? So number one point, everybody in this meeting needs to focus on the environment. It has to start with the E, because we are nature. If we don't have clean air to breathe, we won't make profits. It doesn't really matter how big the corporations are or how amazing your product is, because actually, we need to breathe clean air and drink plastic-free water because we are polluting everything around us all the time. So I just feel that that whole narrative change that you mention is so, so important, and that every board says, okay, what are we going to do today? Number point one, what are we going to do today to make sure that the E, the environment is absolutely crucial, and that our health and wealth and well-being and profit kind of comes down a little bit. And then at the end of the meeting, the last point should be, okay, did we achieve that? Because sometimes the meetings just get carried away and all how much money we're making and all of those crazy things, but we have to just remember, we're just going to send ourselves extinct if we're not careful. And life on land, the SDGs in terms of those, the 14, 15, life on land, life on below water is like pretty critical. Everything else kind of stems from that, in my view. So, okay, I don't know really whether that's a question or a statement or any of those things, but, okay, I'll pass it over.
Sorry, ma'am, what's your name, if I may?
Lizzie,
I couldn't agree with you more. You know what? The problem is, though, everything that you said is not happening. 73% of board time is spent on regulatory compliance, financial management, and risk management. 73%. 81% of board directors, I just presented a research on board's role in sustainability at the World Economic Forum last week. 81% of board directors say, I can't do anything because I don't have information or knowledge. In today's day and age, you don't have information and knowledge. What are you talking about?
Hi, sorry. Can I add to that? Because I also completely agree. But my question is, how do we get there then with companies? And also I think to the point you mentioned, Kaylee, the example you gave during COVID. At the moment, I would say there are so many geopolitical issues in the world that are consuming, regulators, governments, companies, consumers, individuals. And it's really hard to keep that front of mind when there's all this other stuff. So how does this happen when there's so many other factors at play? How do we get there?
Yeah, so I completely agree. I think with COVID, with all the wars happening, governments, sustainability is always the first thing to fall first, right? Because people see it as a nice to have, whereas they shouldn't be seeing it as a nice to have. They should be seeing it as future-proofing our society, basically. The corporation or the society we live in, it should be on the top of the mind of governments and corporates. You mentioned kind of board members looking at it as if we transition to sustainability, we're losing money. But we see Client Earth suing governments. We see Client Earth suing corporates for the amount of pollution they are putting in. It is becoming a liability risk, and I think it's very difficult to get these board members to view it like that. But I really think that is the message we need to be pushing. By transitioning to sustainability, by progressing the SDGs, you really are future-proofing your company. And Rajeev has mentioned, the 100-year-old companies are the ones who have sustainability forefront of mind. But it is difficult when something else happens and then it's, okay, let's go back to invest in fossil fuels.
So I think our current economic system was fundamentally created a little bit with the GDP post-World War II, right? When we were rebuilding the infrastructure. And therefore, measures like GDP do not have climate in it, they do not have environment in it, they do not have nature in it, because it wasn't the focus. So fundamentally, part of how do we get there is pricing climate, pricing nature, because right now they're pricing it pretty close to zero. Nature is definitely priced at zero. Climate, there is a carbon price that some organizations put in internally. There's some that is used kind of in there. So one is you price your externalities. Two is you do work, you are active as citizens, as voters, and you do push policy in whichever way you can push policy. If you work for an organization, you you push for a supportive and an ambitious policy, and we do a lot of that with our corporate leaders group within CISL. But you also show and demonstrate the massive risks that we have today, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, not in 15 years. If we go back to an example of COVID, I work for an 800-year-old institution. We all went online in 3 days. I mean, it takes us longer usually to approve a purchase order than how the speed of transformation with which during COVID we all went digital. So it's finding those ways, finding those tipping points that will tip our economic systems into behaving the way we want for them. And it is supporting leadership, and it is getting leaders to show what's possible, to show what's available out there, but also bringing up a lot of that rear.
And I think the GDP is coupled to resource extraction at the moment. It's you keep producing more, extracting more, exploiting the environment, and you keep making things and you keep selling things, and it just increases your economic growth, but it also has massive effects on the environment. So we really need to decouple, resource extraction from economic growth as well.
We are out of time, so if we can keep this very, very, very brief, I do apologise.
I think we've covered some of the issues that I was going to talk about anyway, but the proportion of boards that are representing these bad actors compared to what you're saying, they're very well-run, well-stewarded organisations, could we really afford to let all of those companies just fall away? No. So we have to do something to educate that board, and I think they are so susceptible to shareholder pressure at the moment to thrive, beat the competition, produce the products as cheaply as possible for the consumer. What is it that we can put in place for those companies that are not behaving well at the moment, other than regulation?
And that's exactly the point that I was trying to make, is that, one area that we are not paying enough attention is values. And the other area that we're not paying enough attention is the idea of opportunity versus risk. So if we shift the narrative to opportunity, if we create a values-based revolution saying this is the right thing to do and there's a better way to make money, that awareness, that education is the one thing that I think we need to do more of.
So just to wrap up quickly, there is clearly a disconnect in what's happening and in what the reality is showing. So a lot needs to be done. In less than 50 seconds, Nina and everyone, please give your last points or key messages for the audience. And sorry for those who couldn't ask the question, but our speakers will be around if you want to talk to them after the session.
We have a tennis season coming up. Arthur Ashe once said, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. So that's my last minute message.
If you begin to see yourself as a steward of planet Earth and humanity, you pivot from seeing sustainability as a cost and reporting problem to a win-win-win growth opportunity.
Don't look at ESG just from one perspective. It's E, S, and G. So look at it from a holistic perspective, and also be kinder. I think we're all arguing and debating and putting all these resources against each other. If you all unite and be kind to each other, I think we can make far more progress much quicker.
My last message is similar to Arushi's. It's holistic framing of the SDGs, of sustainability. You have a lot more power to make more impact than you think if you look at it holistically, and work with your stakeholders, work with people in your value chain, work with your consumers, work with the waste managers. Really start building those connections for the holistic impacts you can make.
Nina, Rajeev, Arushi, and Kaylee, thank you so much for your insight. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the audience for being here, and have a great day. Thank you very much. The session is closed now.
Thanks, everyone.